I share these words now in a spirit of openness and of love. On Friday, I was all set to go on my regular pre-sermon walk when I recalled the article in the paper about a parking ban near my normal entry point into Jefferson Forest. So I tried my luck and went to the parking lot off of Bethesda Side Road. Now, I'm not very familiar with the trails on that side of the forest, so I decided to let go, to simply go wherever my heart pulled me, and more to the point, wherever Finley wanted to go. I knew that I wanted to stay clear of the houses and to steer clear of, well, people. And so I ventured off even the less trafficked trails and began to follow the narrow paths that the animals make. I'm glad I did, because away from people, I saw more birds. I noticed animal tracks in the snow. And I even passed by a well-used burrow. I loved it. Now, I share this not just because walking in a snowy forest feels like the quintessential thing you're supposed to do in the lead up to Christmas. It is. But because it underlines what I've been pointing to throughout these weeks of Advent, namely the importance of being open-hearted if we are going to welcome Christ's coming and the reign of God that he sought to usher in. Consider some of my recent points. Last week, I spoke about the importance of taking time for reflection, to draw inward and take an honest look into the corners of our hearts where we tuck away memories and doubts, negative self-talk and heartbreak. Experience that, though difficult to look at, have effectively shaped who we are more than we want to admit. Some of these things are things we've done or things that we have failed to do. And we may have guilt for some of these things that we continue to carry, which was one of my points 2 weeks ago when I said that confession, well, is not as out of place in Advent as our practice seems to suggest. And this morning's sonnet, well, it reminds us that our hearts can become locked, but they don't have to stay that way. Through self-reflection and prayer, coupled with the grace of the Spirit, we can spring open the latch. And it's this opened lock, this opened heart that I see so much in Mary as she receives a visit from Gabriel. Whether you believe the story is just as Luke has written it, or it's perhaps a legendary telling of Jesus' origin, what is clear is that Luke wants to highlight Mary's open-heartedness, especially when compared to the angelic visit that took place just before this one. In that case, Gabriel comes to Zechariah to let him know that his wife Elizabeth is pregnant. And if you recall from reading Luke's gospel, Zechariah is a priest. He's part of the established order, which means he has, well, some power, some influence, some privilege. His response to the angel Gabriel is guarded. It's locked. Now consider his, how will I know this will be true, to Mary's, how can this be? He seeks proof. Mary simply expresses surprise and wonder. He needs to be in control. She releases that control and is able to say, let it be to me as you have said. In other words, she says, yes. In this, Mary is held up as a spiritual model. She receives the angel's message as she does because she has no need to be in control. Now, this may be rooted in her experience because, of course, she lived far away from the seat of power. She was unmarried, which gave her even less voice in a world where women had very little voice at all. Perhaps in contrast to Zechariah, because she didn't have privilege, there was no reason for her to do anything but trust. And yet, her experiences, well, they could also lead to suspicion, and she's not. It's why she's often considered to be one of what are called the Anuim, the poor, humble ones referred to in the Psalms. They're the ones who are faithful to God in times of injustice and trial, who choose God's way of peace and love rather than the power and violence that is synonymous with one empire after another. These are the poor in spirit that we hear about in the Beatitudes, who see God's reign. Because Jesus speaks about these poor in spirit, it makes me wonder if, well, he was as receptive to the Spirit as he was because, well, he saw it modeled by his mom. And it's because from this place of openness to the Spirit, was from this place that Mary visits Elizabeth and voices the vision of God's reign as the powerful are brought low and the lowly are uplifted. It's a rebalancing of the world, not unlike Isaiah's vision from 2 weeks ago of valleys being filled and mountains being laid low, all to make a way for the coming God. In the end, Mary's yes is really a yes to divine imagination. She places her trust in God's vision for us, and so makes possible the incarnation of that vision in and through her Son. And that's the yes that each of us is invited to make as well. This is a good time for us to do just that. We're heading into lockdown, which means that we'll all be rethinking our festivities even more so than we previously were. And there's an article in Broadview that speaks to this. It's by Rebecca Tucker. She named how online shopping, well, that means that the commercial aspects of Christmas, they can carry on as normal. In the end, we'll be missing each other rather than missing the gifts. This year's holiday can be pared down. It eliminates the pressure to make it perfect for all the visitors who are coming into our homes. And she suggests that this is an opportunity for us to consider what exactly we can do without, and conversely, what we need to do more next year when, fingers crossed, we're able to celebrate together again. To my mind, Rebecca's sentiment speaks to more than just paring things down for Christmas. Part of divine imagination is to consider, like Mary did, what the world looks like when we place people over power. If this is the case, then we need to say yes more often and act on it. Many of us in our lives feel a tug of the Spirit. We feel it to change direction in our lives, to begin to live differently. For some, it could be chucking in a career that gives them security, and instead they follow a passion that brings their heart joy. For another, it's downsizing so they can have more time with family and for community service. And my yes, well, is to live more gently on the planet. So I'll continue to have those experiences of snowy animal tracks and well-used burrows. These choices reflect the heart of Nathan's words to David. God doesn't need a temple. God has been quite happy to live in and through people. And when we honor this principle of people over power, choosing relationships over riches, then we'll begin to see that vision of God. We'll begin to see God's reign. Now, I know what you're saying. This isn't easy. It's not. I know that for myself because Glenn and I worry about our savings when we often So we often buy what's cheaper rather than what will save the planet. And we end up perpetuating industrial farming, global freight patterns, climate change, so much for wanting to live more gently. We end up letting our fear of not having enough when we retire kick in. And we end up taking the well-trod path, or to borrow the image from the first reading, we end up building a temple. Hence my earlier comments about self-reflection, about the need for prayer. Because I've thought about the need to pare down. I know that living simply, paring down what we have, will make the future more manageable, more affordable. And yet, I end up not choosing ecological relationships over riches because that fear again kicks in. There's always something holding me back, which means I need the Spirit's help to more easily say, how can this be? Rather than always saying, how will I know that this is true? I'm not alone in this. None of us are. We have each other to encourage, to offer encouragement, and we have the Spirit that will help us to echo Mary's yes. So friends, as we continue in these Advent days, let us look to Mary in her open-hearted trust. The Spirit is with us, encouraging us to say yes to the unexpected path rather than the well-trod road. When we take it, we will live into God's reign. We will do our part in bringing to birth God's vision for the world. May it be so. Amen.